You're breathtaking.
Uber/taxi drivers of Reddit. What is your best not safe for work story so far? Someone shit in my car. It looked exactly like the poop emoji. She did it through her skirt right as she was leaving the car. I didn't know at first. I drove around and kept spraying Febreze back there wondering why the smell won't go away. Then I looked back and saw she left me a farting gift. I'd be more upset, but damn it, that woman eats her fiber and it was a perfect turd. I respected that, but still charged her a $150 cleaning fee. I have bleach and sanitizer and paper towels for exactly this occasion. Picked up an Irish couple at a concert. The drive was an hour away. Looked back to merge into traffic and woman was going to town giving her man a blowjob. I turned up the music and just let them do their thing. Another ride picked up a super drunk woman. She was getting frisky, placing her hand on my leg as I drove. Made up an excuse that I had to shift. Standard. When we got to her place she asked, "Well, are you coming up?" I told her I was in a committed relationship. She says so. Told her I really can't. Just then I got a ping for another trip, and that was that. She was beautiful though. Picked up an Uber pool once. The first was a woman. The next stop was a man. Heard them chatting, laughing. Then it got quiet, turned around and they're making out. Guy's stop was first. The woman got out with him. I drove for one freaking weekend for Uber in Concord, NH. Pick up downtown Concord by State Capitol, and the destination is not far away. We set off and I should have known by the rancid smell this clown has either finger-banged this shitty asshole or he green apple splattered his pants. It was my third fare but I kept going. No one at destination wanted me to bring him to Keene, NH, about 90 meters away. Told him no. Refused to get out. I called PD. PD came there and immediately tased him for spitting at me, and cop. He exploded with shit. Shit everywhere. He was in the back seat of my Jeep and somehow shit was in my front seat. I called my wife. Had it towed to a dealership. I back and forth with Uber for almost a week before they finally relented to replace my carpet and seats because that poo and smell wasn't coming out. Quit Uber. Frick ride share. Not mine but a taxi driver I interviewed. Asked him some of the weirdest things that he had witnessed/deal with. Group of 3 young women took drugs and were freaking out. He had to bring them to the hospital because 2 of them started convulsing. 1 died while in the ER. Drunk and horny couples are commonplace. He has had people threaten him with knives and guns. One he witnessed. He saw a fellow taxi driver get beaten up by drag queens. They don't like to be harassed. Ex-Uber driver here. Picked up 3 girls from the airport. They just came in from Miami. They were all originally from Peru and ranging from speaks English well. Spoke half English to spoke almost zero English. They asked for my personal cell number so they can have me drive them places all weekend. I drive them to a couple places on Friday and Saturday, ending with driving them all to the wedding they had traveled for. On their way out of my car, the one who speaks English the best tells me that the one who spoke almost zero English thinks I'm really hot. I'm average to above average on a good day. I pick them up from the wedding reception a few hours later and bring them back to their Airbnb. The one who speaks zero English, who thinks I'm hot, hands me her phone from the back with Google Translate open and it says, "Want to get a drink?" I say yes. She moves to the front seat and we keep handing the phone back and forth, speaking to each other. Pick up a bottle of wine and head back to my place. One thing leads to another. We have this amazing connection, and it leads to us hooking up. I drive her back to her friends, still talking via Google Translate. She kisses me goodbye. I was a taxi driver for 4 years while studying at the university. I'll never forget this guy I drove home during a night shift. In Germany, it's common to have a chat with the cab driver. Sometimes customers even tell you really private shit, and this guy seemed completely normal to me. When we arrived at his house, he asked me if I would like to have my dick sucked by him for 20 euros. And just to make it clear, that wasn't his price. He wanted to pay me 20 euros to suck my dick. Didn't saw that one coming. I refused respectfully. Uber/Lyft driver here. Mostly it's horrid, rancid, nasty ass bow and sweat-stained ass cracks on my seats pissing me off. I pick up some crusty people who smell like they not only haven't showered in 4 years but also regularly masturbate while shitting and skip wiping. A mix of the sex odor and ass glands with some wafting and of sickly uric acid. I have a good sense of smell and I freaking hate it. As an Uber driver, grown man with the Lord Farquaad haircut. As an Uber passenger, a driver who hooked up with female passengers regularly, claimed that I want to have as many kids as possible, and his driver bio turned women on to no end. Not me, but was asking my Phil this very question. He drives for Lyft. He told me that one time he was driving this nice young lady and 3 men to one destination, and being the sweet little retired Marine he is, he quietly asked her if she wanted a different location, or if she was okay. Her response is, "Oh yeah, I'll be fine, I have plenty of condoms." I just can't imagine somebody saying that to my Phil. Not a taxi driver but a roommate I had like 12 years ago was a taxi driver. A couple times drunk girls got handsy, he claimed, but otherwise he got tipped with weed often and occasionally other drugs too. I have a worst NSFW passenger story. My friend recently told me about a woman in her social circle who was sexually assaulted on a Lyft trip in the U.S. Pacific Northwest region. This story is definitely a bit out there and made me rethink how to be safer using ride-share apps. So she got a Lyft home from a networking event and woke up the next morning in her own bed, sore, bruised, and with zero recollection of her evening after getting into the Lyft. Disoriented and confused, she tried to piece together events of the night before. She looked at her Lyft ride and saw she had been charged a couple of $100 for her ride, which should have only cost $20 or so. She called Lyft and asked about the charges. They explained it was so high because her trip had taken her on multiple stops and gone out of state. She was super confused and started to freak out as she had no recollection of the last night. She called a friend who took her to the hospital and she had a rape kit done. It tested positive for semen. She went to the police and Lyft. The Lyft driver was banned from the app but disappeared soon after, so police couldn't make an arrest. She hired a PI who suggested they reenact the trip she took. According to the records Lyft had of her multi-state trip, apparently, this triggered her memory and allowed her to remember being drugged and violently gang raped by multiple groups of men and her driver repeatedly. To this day the driver hasn't been caught and Lyft did little but refund her for the ride. I was pretty shocked and horrified by this story. I ride Lyft and Uber pretty regularly. Going forward, I will not accept food or drink that some drivers offer, no matter the gender of the driver. You never know if they've tampered with the food. You can easily make things look sealed, or if they're working a side gig at the same time. Really freaking scary how far this can go. I'm a fake taxi driver. You probably know the rest. Well, I am not a driver but a rider from Pakistan. This one time I booked my Uber, sat in it and the driver started the ride. I sat on the passenger seat, since it is quite normal here to sit alongside driver. So he started the ride and just 10 minutes into the ride, his phone rang. He picked up and started talking in code language. I grew suspicious, but soon he started to yell and like cry, and started saying the person had died. I hit him and he died. No one was there, so picked him up and put him into the back seat of the car. I looked back and holy shit, there was actually a guy lying, covered in some white sheet with stains of fresh blood all over, on the back seat. I started feeling very shaky, trembling all over. I asked him to stop in a really shaky voice, and he said he cannot do that. He will do it in some area where he will not be seen. I totally panicked and started to take control of the wheel to push him to stop. After a few seconds of resistance, he stopped the car and started laughing, and said, "Sir, it was a prank. We are YouTubers and we do pranks. Man, frick with your pranks." Had a bachelorette party of 7 get, and even though my vehicle could seat 6, 2 of the women, who were all super drunk, keep commenting how hot I am. I'm average or maybe slightly above average on a good day, and they get all the women to agree to a 7 time with me and let the bride-to-be watch. I turned them down for 2 reasons. 1, I would never cheat on anyone, much less my wife, who is one of the most amazing people I have ever met, and 2, they were all wasted and I was obviously sober, so it wouldn't have been very ethical. Someday I might regret it because one of them was possibly the hottest woman I have ever seen in person and the rest were above average as well. But at least they all whipped their tits out the rest of the ride home as respect for my commitment to my wife. They knew I had a dashcam too that recorded inside and outside the vehicle. Definitely save that video. I used to drive for Lyft and Uber for a couple of years. I picked a guy up from the club one Saturday night. He sat up front, which I had never had a problem with before. I kind of appreciated it most of the time because it's a green light to be friendly and make conversation. As soon as we get going, it became clear that this guy was wasted, horny, and interested in me. He kept telling me that I was so nice and touching my arm for no reason. Made me pretty uncomfortable. But I figured it'd be over in a couple minutes, so I just tried to be polite while hinting that I wasn't into it. We pulled up in his driveway and he told me that if I went into his house he had a big tip that he wanted to give me. Being a straight married man, I politely stated that I didn't need a tip and I'd like to be on my way to the next rider. He asked for a hug. I said no thanks. He said just a quick hug and I'll get out of your hair. I thought, whatever makes the sense sooner. So I reluctantly allow this strange man to hug me. Big mistake. I know, he makes it last too long, and as soon as I'm really starting to push him away he kissed me on the neck. At that point I opened his door for him from the driver's seat and shoved him out the passenger side onto his ass in his driveway. I still shudder thinking about what would have happened if I didn't outweigh him by probably 75 pounds, or if he would have had a weapon or something. Just that one neck kiss made me feel so violated. I called it quits for the night and took a very long shower. I felt like I could feel his lips on my neck for the rest of the night. It felt filthy. I can't imagine what a real sexual assault would make a person feel like, but I feel like that night gave me just the slightest hint, and it felt horrific. I really only have two at this point. First was during me taking a group of people home from a party. Got to talking about my social life. I have none as of this writing, and my family status. I mention I'm single and always have been. The woman in my passenger seat asks if I have children. I reply that I have not. She asks about girlfriends. I reply I never have. She gasps and asks if I've ever had sex. I reply, again, negative, all of which are true. Unfortunately, and she asks my age. I'm honest with her about my age, and she asks if I want to stop and have dinner with her. I say no. She then asks if I want to come in and have breakfast with her, placing her hand on my thigh and rubbing. I reply that I already have another client lined up, and as she'd been talking most of the time up till that point about her husband, it probably wouldn't have been the best idea. Second was only a few weeks after I started driving, so first, I was technically temporarily off filling my gas tank when a, shall we say, user of hard drugs walked up to me. She was rather clearly affected by the long-term effects of these drugs, pockmarks, track lines, terrible complexion, open sores, probably looked about 20 years older than she was, so on and so forth, and asked if I was available. I said once I was done filling my tank up I would be more than happy to take her somewhere if she used the app to guarantee payment. Didn't trust her at all at that point. Long story short, she ends up offering to spend the night with me, letting me do whatever I wanted to her, in return for taking her home, which she indicated was a few blocks away, but for all I know could have been hours. I politely said no. We had a 20-something girl who would call for a cab every Sunday night around 2 a.m. to have beer sent to her house, and whichever driver that brought the beer would receive a blowjob. We could all hear everything the dispatcher said to any driver, but not what the driver said in response. When he told us she called, he'd ask who wanted the run. It took about 1 microsecond for him to say, "Okay, you got the job." I told this story to the woman I was living with at the time, and she didn't find it as amusing as I did. The next thing I know, I'm working days. The joke was on her though. That lady called in the daytime to almost entirely to get rides to the jail to visit boyfriends. All the guys she knew either were currently in jail or possibly in jail because of her. I brought her back home one day and she said the money is in the house. I followed her to the front door but didn't cross the doorway. We were warned to avoid going into girls' homes. While standing there, she grabs a stack of Polaroids of her having sex with various guys from the counter and tells me to look them over, and went into another room to get the money. I do. There are every possible positions and some had more than one guy involved. While doing this, she comes back wearing just panties and snuggles up under my arm. She gave me a brief description of how each encounter was for her. This guy was huge. These guys were brothers and so on. I panic and bolt back to my cab. She follows and says I forgot the fare. She pays and I leave. I take her to various places over the next year about a dozen times, and no, my picture is not in that pile. By the way, for some reason this is a story I never told my girlfriend. I didn't put on a seatbelt one time. My father is a taxi driver. He told me a story. One time he met a couple who was very loudly speaking about swinger club visit. After this story I've understood that I will not to be a taxi driver. Repost of one of my previous comments. Probably not that bad compared to other stories, but is a memorable one for me. I was driving these three larger unattractive women, probably late 20s, back from a house party, and they began talking about problems they've encountered while partying and clubbing. They speak as if they get hit on and get with a lot of guys. Doubtful. One woman starts to brag how when she was at a party some guy slipped something in her drink and that it has happened before, which begins a dick measuring contest. One of the other women pipes up and says how she's been drugged several times before at parties and how men only want one thing from her. The other woman chimes in and says how she's been drugged even more times and has been sent to the hospital for it a couple of times. They were all saying these things in such a proud, bragging manner, which I just thought was really messed up. Please subscribe if you liked the video. It really helps the channel to grow. See you again.